Well, welcome to the second part of our three-part series. We're very excited to be really looking into practices and skills and different stories that are all around how we can design certainty into schooling and learning and education in a very uncertain world. So I know as more and more people are joining us, I'll say a very good hello, good morning, good night, good evening, good middle of the day from wherever you are joining from, and to our crew that is joining us as well. We've got our team from Schoolbox here today, and of course our very special guests. So a very big hello to all of you. And what I would love to see in the chat is if you could tell us where you're joining from today, perhaps even what time of the day it is where you are. I'm here in Melbourne and it is around 10 o'clock at night. But how fabulous is it that we can be joining in these conversations from anywhere in the world, and now this has become our norm as well. So we are today looking at focusing in on this idea of connection, really engaging with all of those members of our community. And if you were with us last week, you know that we were talking about adaptability, how we might be able to look for those different spaces within our schools and within our organizations that we might be able to make some significant changes within. Our leading voices really talked about policy, leadership, and importantly, parents. And we also gave some big kudos to those unsung heroes in our schools, our marketing teams, our enrollments, those that were really looking at how they could keep the community together in different ways. Today, we are looking at some of those different ways that we have connected with members of our community pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and as we're rolling into what they call a new normal. But I promise I won't be using all of that COVID nomenclature too much, but it's certainly an interesting discovery for us to have. Wanted to show you something that came out of the UK only this morning from the Relationships Project. They've had a look at what some insights are around citizen reactions to particularly policy over the past 100 days of lockdown. They found all sorts of insights, and at the moment it is quite qualitative, their data. But I thought that this was something really interesting to share with us as we start to talk about connection. They were saying prior to the pandemic, citizens, when they were looking at attitudes and behaviours, were largely doubting of policymakers. They really looked at, competing priorities across organisations and had this sort of reluctance to innovate. But now, as people have had to navigate their lives and their ways of doing business, learning, working, living in very different ways, we're looking at now citizens on general and en masse, and of course these are generalisations, are now a little bit more trusting. We're looking at things that are a little bit more personalised, and that's certainly something that we look at in our third session next week. And I really like what they've come to discover about an open-mindedness to innovation and change. So as we break into finding out a little bit more about our leading voices, I just wanted to sort of bring up on the screen and say hello to everybody who is joining us so that I can have a little bit of a look at that chat and see where everyone's coming from. So we've got some fellow Melbourneians here tonight. We've got folks joining from Korea, Hong Kong, Jakarta, Brisbane, Cambodia, Singapore, Taiwan, Kazakhstan. Hello, welcome. Chiang Mai. So fantastic to see all of you. It is a real joy. Now, we have got some leading voices on. I know that there are always that beautiful tech problem that we don't get when we can just walk straight into a room. So hopefully we will be joined by our friend Jabiz really shortly. But in the meantime, I would love to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about, again, the reminder of where we're going with this, and to also kick into my conversation with Daniel Silman. So we will start off with a story. We will then have a look at a particular skill that I want to share with you. And this one's very much about how do we get into the hearts and minds and hands of folks that we are working with or potentially working with. And then to think a little bit more about some of those solutions that we've already got through our friends at Schoolbox as well. I'd like you to please use the Q&A function in this webinar if you would like to ask our panelists a question, and that includes our great team from Schoolbox as well, particularly if you're looking to dive a little bit deeper into the solutions that they have around connecting. And the chat function can always be used to have a bit of a chat with some other participants, or maybe share something that you're working on as well. Now, Miro is our collaborative platform to add in your inputs, your ideas, and your experience. I would love it if one of the Schoolbox folk could pop that in the chat for us. That is something that we are going to be using and have used last week, and we're going to grow our insights and ideas on there. So it becomes a little bit of a board that you can come back to and share with your leadership, share with others from your school, and share that as far and wide as you possibly can as well. So today's leading voices, Jabiz Razdana is a good friend of mine. Jabiz and I have known each other for a very long time, since we were quite young teachers. He's been teaching in international schools for over 16 years and is incredibly experienced at really forming that student and parent connection and relationship. In fact, people would come to see his classroom from all over the world to try and understand how he was building a love of learning, and in particular literacy, through how he would set up different assessment connections, and also how he would set up his physical space. So hopefully Jabiz can join us really soon if he's not there with us already. And Daniel Silman is absolutely a wonderkind. He is a global business consultant. He's got so much experience in really looking at best practice, and particularly knows our education space as well, but he's going to be bringing a bit more of a conversation about that broad idea of supporting education, what he has seen in different organizations, and a different perspective, really thinking about, quite often we don't get it necessarily right with the connections as well, and really looking at that broad idea of what might be possible. So I am going to jump out of here so that I can absolutely see all of those questions in the chat as well. So again, make sure that you've on that Miro link. What I would love to do is just share this Miro so that you can see what we are talking about for those that might not be on there just yet. So all you need to do is come along over to this green screen here. I'm going to see if I can move this over and bring you all to me. So we've got about 15 or 20 people in there at the moment. You just click on the link. You don't need to sign into anything. And just as last week, we've got a very similar way of doing this. We are going to jump into a post-it note. That's our big driving question for participants. How have you fostered connection in your practice or organization? We just double click on a sticky note there, and we might say, greetings at the school gate. We can see it's like just a very big notice board of post-it notes. So we will have that going in the background. Please do feel free to keep adding in your thoughts to that while I spotlight Daniel Silman. How are you this morning, this afternoon, this evening, tomorrow, yesterday, Daniel, and where are you joining us from?
This evening over here, I'm in Phuket, Thailand, so it's 6 p.m. over here, or 6:10.
Oh, fantastic. A little bit more of a civilized hour. And tell me, what have you been working on today?
Well, I'm currently working as the Director of Marketing and Admissions at British International School, Phuket. So today we're up and running in terms of having students back on campus, and so a lot of well, very positive materials coming in. You know, imagery, video, good news stories of kids being on campus and learning, thriving. So my job today has been to look at how we're going to get that out there as quickly as possible. It's a very nice position to be in, but yeah, that's what we've been doing today and in the past few weeks, really.
That sounds fantastic. Can you give us some insights into what some of those materials might be? What are they emerging as?
We're doing kind of impromptu fly on the wall documentaries called Life at BIS, because, you know, and I guess we're going to talk about transparency and exposure, you know, during the course of this webinar. So almost cinema verite glimpses of what life is like on campus. At the same time, we have a more standard series of promotional videos where we are trying to get the messages we want to get across about each area of the school. So those are going out as well. And just the celebratory events, you know, it's International Women's Day. We're celebrating International Day at the school at the same time. So yeah, a really nice atmosphere at the school that we want to convey and get across.
There's nothing better than a great story of a school and of learners, and it's rare to be able to catch that in action in an authentic way, isn't it? So it's good to hear that you've got both. You've sort of got the quite polished informational, and then by the sounds of it, those that are in action and those great stories of the happy noise of school.
That's right.
I love that. So Daniel, prior to the work that you're doing now, tell us a little bit about your journey through that business education coming together. How do they sort of blend? How have you made a career out of that?
I mean, if I could summarize my career, it is really in the space between organizations and customers, and connecting customers to those organizations, usually for and vice versa, usually for company growth. So I was doing that rather casually for a period of 5 years, until I realized actually there was a career in it. And I started a business consultancy in Thailand, actually in 2005, on a different island, on Koh Samui, so a much smaller island. And Samui is a touristy destination, so most of my clients were in the hotel industry, restaurants, villa property developers, these types of things. And I had to consider where my heart lay, really, in terms of what was something I could really promote with passion, what was something I really wanted to kind of assist in terms of connecting customers to organizations. I cared obviously about all of my clients, but I had to kind of dig deep, and I kind of looked back on my personal experience and my journey, and I'd studied overseas in the US, having come from the UK, and I just thought, well, that was a very significant experience for me, in terms of it was a step up, it was a challenge, it's all the things that maybe university education promises to be. But I felt the international element was a significant element of that, to make that happen. And I recollected that there is an area of work where you basically recruit international students. And so I started aligning my client list towards educational institutions. And since then, I've been doing that. I've still provided services for other industries, but the majority of my clients, deliberately on my part, have been in the education field, and that includes some permanent posts as well. So like the one I'm in now is a permanent position, and I was also the international marketing director at a university in the UK. I built an international office from scratch, really, for another university in the UK. I had a longer term post at a school in Asia as head of admissions and marketing. So it's really been juggling short term consultant clients, and then stepping in when I find a challenge big enough and exciting enough into longer term positions.
It seems to me like you've literally made a career out of making connections, and you've had to get very good at what it means to be authentic in those connections for a client base. But when we're talking education, there's something a little bit different, isn't there? It's not so transactional. Can you tell me about what connection means in education, and some of those maybe tips and tricks around how you've got it right in the past?
Well, there's unlike other industries, certainly other industries that I've worked in education, there's a broad acceptance of very varying stances on what those connections should be. So what I mean by that is you will hear in some education circles, in some schools, in some universities that it's best for education, it's best for the students and the service if teachers and academics are left to their own devices. Mm-hmm. And basically follow their interests and passions and so on, and never have to hear the word data or results and the like. And equally in education circles, there's another or a distant end of the scale in terms of opinion, which says that education has to be completely tailored to the demands of the customer, whether that's the student or the parent or so on. And it's just a service like all other services, and you can measure it and so on. And I've just found it interesting that not only does that real spread of education philosophy exist within the same field, within the same space, I've frequently found it existing within the same school, so or same university. And I think, you know, I'm not going to say what I think the right stance is or where I stand particularly on the scale, because in my position, I want to be sympathetic with the customer and the organizations as well. But
you've got lots and lots of experience in this, and some generalizations are totally fine.
Yeah, but my concern has always been, and the things I've picked up on, or the problems I thought that needed to be solved, is that when you have different stances on that question, you know, to what extent should the organization, the academic organization, be responsive to the customer? And you haven't kind of articulated and put your flag in the sand and said, well, this is our position on that scale. And you know, if you like that as a staff member, join us. If you like it as a potential customer, join us. If you don't like it, go somewhere else, you know. Rarely is that articulated and stated. And instead, you find within the same organizations often very, very different philosophies about what responsiveness to the customer should be. And very different expectations from the customer about what type of service and what type of responsiveness they'll get. And that leads to frustration in all parties. It sometimes leads to defensiveness, it leads to tension, dissatisfaction. So that's the angle I guess I come at in this topic. So when I join an institution or take on work or a challenge for them, that my first question is to them, where do you stand? You know, what's your position on this? What's the position of the senior leadership team or the vice chancellor or, you know, the head? Has that been articulated to the staff? Do you have their buy-in? Do the customers know what your stance is? And it's, as I say, in my experience, it's only something I've had to unpick and unpack in the education field, because other industries, certainly that I've worked in, nobody really questions, for example, why you need a significant advertising budget in an insurance firm, or why you might need a marketing department in a hotel company.
Right.
You know, there isn't the expectation that you build a hotel and then people on the other side of the world will instinctively know about it and turn up. But yeah, in the education field, there's a bit of educating to do in terms of the needs of that customer connect.
There's a couple of interesting things there I want to throw over to Jabiz in a second, but I found over particularly the past 18 months within the school space and the education space that things like marketing and the terms customer and the concepts of branding aren't as as dirty words as they used to be. It's that knowledge of creative positioning and actually making quite visible the great work of the communities that we do, and taking pride in our different organisations as well. Jabiz, I'm going to welcome you across and pop you in a spotlight here as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And my friend, it is so good to see your face again. Now, I know that there's 3 probably distinct and possibly more, but let's go with this for argument's sake or discussion's sake, that there are sort of staff, parents and students are very much our customers, if you will, or our 3 main groups. Jabiz, I know you're very, very focused on the connection with the students. I'm really interested in, you know, how have you connected with each of those different groups, and how do you manage the needs of that on a day-to-day basis as, you know, someone that others lean upon for understanding how to connect and understanding how to teach really well?
Yeah, hi, nice to see you. It's been a while. Hi to everyone who's watching and listening. Are we kind of talking specifically in the context of COVID in the last year?
Well, I think that it's pretty much on our minds, so it's a good thing for us to springboard from, and feel free to get nostalgic about pre-COVID times as well, Jabiz.
Well, I mean, we're the school I'm in Singapore. We're kind of, it's interesting to know where people in the world, like what situations they're in and the level of disconnect that they have gone through, and the degree of it, and for lack of a better word, the trauma of it, I guess. Like, so for us, we had a pretty severe lockdown last school year. So for us in Singapore, that would have been from about March to late May or June, where we were completely remote. No one was allowed on campus, which is, I'm pretty sure, a model that a lot of people have gone through. But we were actually pretty fortunate that in the last 2 weeks in June, we were able to have some contact. And for all intents and purposes, we're pretty much back to normal in a lot of ways this school year. So there are definitely restrictions, and school life feels very different than a normal year, but we're not in any kind of lockdown. So there's kind of the during the heavy lockdown, and then there's where we are now. But I think in either case, some of the things about how we keep that sense of community with students is really realizing what are the things that they still crave and need and want, that need to be the same as they always were, and you want to replicate that in an online version or in a community, and what are some of the things that just won't work that way, and rather than kind of bang your head against the wall trying to replicate them, knowing when to be flexible and say, you know what, that thing that we thought was going to be replicable is not, and needs to either be adapted or tweaked or changed. And then I think another major part is, what are the things that are novel and new that are going to bring a sense of kind of wonder and curiosity, because it's not routine. It's not just, oh, you know, this is the same way school was, because it's a different reality, right? It's a different environment. So really looking at those 3 things of keeping that structure, that backbone, so it feels familiar and students recognize, hey, this is what school looks like. Not forcing them to kind of be slaves to that, and being able to change things, and then bringing in novel things, novel ideas or events or activities that feel different, so they feel excited to be there, because it's not just the same old thing.
Has your connection with parents changed as a result of perhaps them seeing what you're doing every day, or even hearing it in the background as perhaps they were working from home?
Yeah, and actually I think a lot of the reaction or interactions I've had with parents because of this have been positive, like almost a little bit better. So just to give you a very simple example, when we had parent meetings where we wanted parents to come in, whether it was a behavioral issue or discipline or whatever the reason was, we've been forced to just do Google Meets or Zoom calls. And it's allowed a lot of flexibility and timing of when we can have those meetings. Oftentimes now both parents are there, where before it was challenging to get them both there. And for better or for worse, it kind of adds a layer of informality that we didn't have before, because they're literally like in their home and, you know, not necessarily sitting in a stuffy office. So that's been pretty positive. And then just like I mentioned for the students, a lot of the things that we had that were designed for in-house, like three-way conferences, or like our English department does a literacy night. We sat and said, we're not going to cancel these things. So what do they look like in terms of being virtual or online? And like three-way conferences are a great example. We got software that allowed us to do exactly what we did, but online. And to be honest, I can't imagine we'll go back to face-to-face even when we can, because it allowed parents to engage on kind of their time in a way that felt more authentic than it was when it was face-to-face. The other things about, it's the irreplaceables with parents. Like, our school has a family festival, or we have, theater productions and sporting events. And, I always had parent socials where we would meet for drinks or dinner, and those kinds of non-formal interactions, which are priceless, I think, in building that partnership with parents. And we just can't have those. And we definitely feel the effects of those even this year when we're back to normal. So parents are just rarely on campus, and that, at a school like ours, that feels really strange, because, we can talk about you said the dirty word of customer and all that. And I get it. I work at an international school in Singapore, and we brand and market, and we're looking for, customers to fill the seats. But I often think of our relationship with parents as a partnership, right? And they're just as much involved in the product we're selling as than what we're selling with them. And they need to be on campus. They need to be involved as participants. And so to not have them there feels like there's a big gap. So there's been benefits for sure, but there's also that sense of just that humanness of it is missing at times.
It's interesting that you were saying kind of around that partners and that relationship. Daniel and I were chatting earlier on about the significance of the stories and of capturing those stories, as something that is a legacy piece. It could be a learning piece, but it is an important marketing tool. And in fact, we're not just marketing our schools or our organizations, but the joy of learning and schooling in general. I said last week that I think this whole year of 2020 really kind of renewed the social contract that communities have with schools. They actually form a really important function. And for us to just have that chat that maybe we were having back in 2018 or 19 and maybe earlier, that let's bring everything online and it can be anywhere and everywhere. We found out very quickly that actually that shared space and that shared community is incredibly important. So Daniel, I want to kind of come back to you for a second on that. How much of your efforts, or do you know across the board, and Jabiz, you kind of alluded to it just then as well, is that connection to time and effort and resources, connection into the current communities, and how much is that focused on future families? That's something that's come through our chat very clearly. How do you connect in with those that aren't customers, clients, or future partners yet?
In terms of a year or so ago, so around the first lockdown in March or so, I think all hands basically on deck had to turn towards supporting the current families. In the face of uncertainty, it was very difficult to put, say, an advert out there, because you don't know what you're going to be advertising actually, before we actually figured all this out. So so in terms of resources and effort and time, it was 100% into actually maintaining that connection, obviously, because usually in the marketing team, that's where you get your comms skills and your digital skills and so on, also the IT team, of course. And so really that became a function to support teachers maintain those connections with the students who are learning at home and with the parents. It's slowly eased off that need with the students at least being back on campus. And also at the same time, there's been sort of a rising clarity of what we do offer. I think schools have kind of figured out that no matter what the external circumstances, pandemic or otherwise, we're all pretty much committed to the idea that learning should continue as best as we can deliver it, under any circumstances. And so really, now that we've kind of found that, or I think have got that agreed belief or value, that's something we can push out. That's something we can explain to prospective families. I don't think you can kind of legitimately say to any prospective family or students, we know exactly what next term is going to be like, or what next academic year is going to be like. But you can kind of say now, this is our commitment. You know, no matter what happens, we've kind of proven this is our philosophy. We are absolutely dedicated to delivering education. We're passionate about it. And we've kind of proven over the past 16 months or so that we're able to do it even in exceptional circumstances. And those circumstances have changed. It hasn't just been lockdown or back to school. You know, there's been hybrid learning going on. There's been sort of all manner of variations of school opening and school closure and so on. But yeah, somehow that we've got through it. So certainly, you know, that's worth celebrating and telling prospective parents.
We worked with a school only last week, 2 days, their whole faculty, they had been apart, and then there's a big building project happening in their school, and they actually all hadn't been together for a while. And one of the driving questions was, we say we're family, but do we have almost separate rules of play for parents, for faculty, for prospective, for, you know, the local authorities, and of course for students? And so to create a shared set of working core values was a really great process for us. And they said, look, this is how we are going to design and message certainty in an uncertain world. And actually it came up to, let's flip that and say, this just opens us up to innovation and delivery in all sorts of manners and methods. I mean, to be able to say that we face challenges with an open mind, that we're fun, friendly, and genuine, that we trust each other, that we're clever, to be able to apply that to a parent group, to a regional director that might come along, or a system director, certainly for students and teachers and parents, was such a formative moment. I know there's sort of a question or a comment in the chat here around, how did faculties remain connected? How does the organization itself, those who are, you know, running at the staff, how do they remain connected? Jabiz, I'd be interested to know, you've got such a big campus and such a staff though that really love that collaboration piece. Like, how did you remain connected when you couldn't have those shared experiences that you talked about that you had with your parents? I know that you have that as a staff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a roller coaster for everybody, right? There's the initial, you know, rally of the troops, and everyone rolls their sleeves up, and it's a work in hand. Like, we were writing policies, there's so many things that just we were called upon as a staff to kind of figure out. And I agree with you. I think that was quite a formative time, because it made us realize how nimble and flexible we could be as a staff, and what were the things that we were able to do. So when that kind of died down, and then things became a bit more routine, yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it was those things that, like, you realize, hey, as a department, we used to play poker every Saturday night. Let's figure out how we can have a poker game online. Or, you know, there's all those things that you did, and now you try to find ways to kind of maintain those routines. We had different groups that would meet, you know, like our English department would meet every Tuesday for like a happy hour at when everything was over, from 3:30 to 4:30. And then you can pop in and pop out, but we maintained our meetings as regularly scheduled, and life kind of started having this new normal. And so I think it's just that idea of being able to realize the flexibility of your staff and what they're capable of, and then also maintaining routines, and then also knowing kind of when to give people a break. Like, as a head of grade, I remember working with my team sometimes, and you can just tell they were like really stressed or anxious, or things were bubbling up that felt more extreme than they would have been when we were face to face. So it's also realizing that, like I said about with the kids, you can't just maintain everything exactly as if you were on campus. You had to find ways to relieve pressure.
It sounds like, from everyone I've spoken to, and you've both amplified this message beautifully through your very different experiences in what you're working on, that that if you don't have that understanding of the people that you are working with or delivering to or wanting to reach, it's just not going to be a connection. There has to be that sort of real understanding, reading the room, if you will, knowing people in order to foster those connections. So I'm going to share a little tool that can help folks to do that in a strategic way. But I wanted to check in with our Miro board here, and things like this. I know, Daniel, you've worked with Miro. Jabiz, I'm absolutely sure you've worked with this or Padlet or something similar. These are those proxies for connection and engagement as well that we found were incredibly important, and to keep that kind of fresh and moving along. And what the legacy of the pandemic has left us with is the ability to be a whole lot more efficient and a whole lot more effective in utilizing these to reach a wider audience. But when we asked on today's Miro, how have you fostered connection in your practice or organization? We've got some really great examples. The social emotional learning, absolutely having that as a bit of a cornerstone of policy. Changing consultations with parents. We've got really spending time connecting, the checking in with colleagues. Even when we were talking about adaptability last week and agility, it was always around that collegial check-in. The well-being comes into place, sharing that challenge, and thinking about things like building online communities as well. So we would love it if more and more ideas of that fostering connection, the transparency, understanding relationships, some of those routines perhaps, or consistent practices that both Daniel and Jabiz have shared might come into play. Now, what I might do, if it's okay with both of you, you can start to add into that Miro, take a little bit of a break from your stories, and we'll thank you for that. We'll come back for a bit of a right of reply, but I'm keen to share now what a tried and true technique is in how we actually get to know folks. So this skill is called the persona canvas. I use this all the time, and I utilize this obviously in work around building strategy with schools. We look at it when we're looking at some restorative practices. Perhaps something may have gone wrong and something's not quite hitting the side. Before we solve the problem, we try and understand who's at the center of that. And it's a beautiful thing to use with students as well for a whole range of ways. Again, we get to build empathy. We're able to literally teach empathy through this, but it's a really nice thing if you're getting a project-based learning concept off the ground, or of course using design thinking. So creating those personas helps you to understand the needs, the experiences, the behavior, the goals of anyone in your school community. And so you can anticipate what to do next. So my key 5 elements, we know that we should have lots and lots of sticky notes. We know that it should be for a selected period of time. Last week, I think we said that you should be looking at that pre-mortem canvas for even up to a day, having it up here. I tend to, for this one, probably put about 20 minutes on the clock, and we go round and round in circles. But our 5 key elements, we're looking at who they are, looking at what they think, what they feel, what they do, and what they say. And your canvas looks a little bit like this. So what you tend to do is come up with your problem, your scenario, something that you're working on. And we actually have a little bit of fun here, a little bit of creative fun by making up somebody who is a little bit like somebody that you might be designing for. Or if you have the exact person in your mind, you of course can put them in the middle. And we like to give them a name. We like to give them a job. You can give them a gender if you like. We're just basically trying to get a picture in our head of who they are. Of course, when you give this to students as well, it's a really fun one for them to start to create up and design. In fact, I know of a company has nothing to do with education, but on a big wall in their office, they're a startup and they're selling a product. And what they do is they've actually got real customers and their personas around the wall. So they find that if a new product is coming in and they want to test it out, they find who might be interested in that. And they've got a real live persona testing group. All right, I'm going to kick over to our Miro board. So Pete, I might get you to pop that back into the chat for me if possible. Let's all jump on that Miro board. I'm going to share it here with us. Daniel, Jabiz, you need to be getting on board this, because who doesn't love a virtual sticky note? I mean, really, a virtual sticky note is a very cool thing. All right, I have set you up a scenario here. We want to move parent-teacher conferences online. Now, Jabiz, am I using the right terminology here of parent-teacher conferences? You talked about them a little bit earlier, that sort of conversation around the progress of students. Beautiful. All right, I've got that language right. So what we want to test out for probably the next 3 or 4 minutes here, we want to grab a Post-it note. So you go over to the side here. You'll remember it's got the little flick up on the bottom where the Post-it note is. You can select any color that you would like. And I'd like you to put on a bit of a hat of imagination here. Think of Chris. Chris is 35. Chris is a banking professional with 3 children aged 4, 10, and 13. So about our scenario here of moving the parent-teacher conferences online, what might Chris say? What might Chris do? What might Chris think? And what might Chris feel? You can make up all sorts of scenarios, and I'm sure that you either are Chris, or you've met Chris, or you know of Chris in your community. So I'd love it if we can get a whole range of different perspectives on here, so we can start to build out an example of what this persona might look like. All right, let's start to have a look at this in action. So Jabiz, I'm going to, as folks start to put this into play, kick back over to you here. Thinking about that parent-teacher conference, what are some of the things that parents have said, have thought, you know, have felt, and what are some of their sort of actions that they've taken or behaviors that they've exhibited through parent-teacher conferences online?
Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback I have is a bit anecdotal. So I'm
that's
sure
great.
We got feedback, but I haven't looked through it to be any consistency. But I think a lot of the feeling was it was efficient. And it sounds weird to say, but like, Singapore is a very small place, but sometimes it can take anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes just to get from one place to the other. So the fact that that time was cut off, that they didn't have to worry about the commute there and the commute back, was really important to people, I think. The software that we had was really, didn't have too many glitches. It seemed to work really well. So I would assume that they felt that that was a nice way of bringing a tool in that was necessary, instead of just kind of putting something together ourselves. So we had a interview software that allowed parents to sign up for interviews, and then the camera would automatically come on, and within 6.5 minutes, it would give them a timer, and then it would count down, and then at 7 minutes, it would shut off, and then the next teacher would be right there ready to go.
Wow, that's an amazing, I haven't heard of that one across the world. That's an amazing process.
Yeah, I can find out exactly what it was called. I don't exactly remember, but like, it was really efficient. And so I would say that parents would think and feel that it was important that we took that extra step. So it felt very seamless. And again, I think those are the things that they took away from, like I said, I can't imagine we would go back to face-to-face parent conferences.
You did note that parents were turning up, it together, where once upon a time one might miss out. I think that's a really important thing, that they've started to come into the life of the school and the educative process a bit more. There's a school that I'm working with here in Australia that very much agrees with you. They're not going back to the old way of parent-teacher conferencing. They'll bring parents in when they can, in more of a social sense or a learning sense. But what they've chosen to do is actually run those full days. There are 6 throughout the year for different year groups. And as a result, they are then building up or keeping the muscles strong of the remote learning for students, seeing it as an upskill day. So it's very much around those enterprise or transferable skills, self-directed learning on those 6 days for the whole senior year group, which is certainly something that probably would have been difficult to get across the line had we not have done lockdown learning or been in remote learning for a pandemic. And now we can see it as a really essential skill of how we work from home, how we self-manage, and how we operate too. Daniel, what are your insights on this? This has very much got to do with the role of the parent. And I know at the moment you're working a lot more with parents. You probably weren't when you're in higher education. What are some of those specific needs of parents?
In regards to connecting over parents' evenings, do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you think around how that's looking at your school, or maybe there are some insights more generally with connecting in with the school.
Well, we're a boarding school, so you can imagine, those parents of boarders are loving this, because it kind of puts everybody all parents on the same playing field, in that we're all remote, and we have to get used to this software and so on. And so, and yeah, same. It's been a positive experience. It's been interesting to hear that some of these innovations that we've taken on board and that other schools have taken on board to deal with the current situation are going to be kept. I think there's going to be a case for in a number of areas, actually.
It's a really nice thing to be able to put those parents then on an equal playing field, and they have that transparency and connection. I know that the Schoolbox crew with the parent portal have found that that's possibly one of the best features that have come out of that need to build up new technology platforms or offerings, things that were needed when we started to have different ways of connecting with different members of our community. And of course, having that transparency and visibility of what's going on in different classrooms as well was significant for leadership, significant for collegial collaboration as well. Some really important things there. Pete, I know that Pete Cottle, you put something in the chat just before. I'm going to stop my share so that I can have a little bit of a look at that. You were talking about the parent portal and how that has been significant. Just wondering some insights that you could share about why it was important to connect in with parents.
Yeah, thanks, Summer. And I'm loving it, Jabiz and Daniel. This is great. I mean, the critical piece is that there's a triangle within schools. There's the school, there's the student, and then there's the parents. And they're often a forgotten piece. And I think when everyone went to home learning, everyone got an insight into what was happening for children in their own home. And I guess the curtain was metaphorically pulled across, and, parents saw what was happening inside a school. And so, being able to provide parents this sort of seamless experience where the school came to them wherever they were, as they needed it, when they needed it, was really critical. And so our schools really felt that was sort of underpinned the whole COVID period and just put them in a really good position.
So what was some of the feedback, say, from teachers as well? So we know that parents were then in a really good position to have deeper conversations around learning and around, the decisions they made. I mean, we know from the work that we've done broadly, when parents were able to see what was happening, teachers were then held on more of a higher esteem. We had so many letters from parents to leadership. And in fact, enrollments have improved the more that things have become transparent for parents as well. But what are staff saying to you, Pete, teachers?
Yeah, the ability to actually see what might be happening in the home environment in terms of the learning, and bringing learning into an environment that is happening wherever the child actually is doing it. And I think that the whole situation has really brought into focus that learning happens in a variety of ways, in a variety of places, and being able to capture that in a really simple way is really, really critical. And so teachers are loving the fact now that, through our platform, they can actually have the children and the parents share back what's going on in their own home around the sort of home learning and those sort of just in time moments around, that aren't just formal learning opportunities in terms of course driven learning, but hey, this is what my child is actually learning. Because we all know that learning takes a variety of different sort of formats and it can happen in a really rapid way.
Nice. Well, that is basically all that we sort of got time for today. But what we found was happening last week is that people were really sticking around. They wanted to, particularly on that Miro, keep adding into it. I want to remind you that I will put these slides on the Miro and that you can download these canvases. And of course, you can always have a look at that Schoolbox solution by getting in touch with Pete and the team as well. But we hope to see you next week for our final of our 3 sessions around these, the solution series. It's not just talking what is, but what has happened and what we might be able to do. Some really, really tangible ways of connecting in with all members of your school community from a range of angles. I would dearly like to thank my friend Jabiz for joining, and my new friend Daniel as well. Thank you for your wisdom, your time, and your stories. And thank you to everybody here for the work that you're doing on behalf of learners every single day. If you want to connect with me, I'm Edusump on Twitter, and more than happy to share more stories of successful learners as well. But thank you so much for your time. And we will sign out from here, and we will see you over on the Miro. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.